Pam Bondi approaches homeless veteran woman. What Pam does next will warm your heart. She sat alone on the cold pavement, shivering, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. People walked past like she didn't exist. But then, out of nowhere, Pam Bondi stopped. She knelt down, whispered something, and what happened next, no one saw coming. The woman's name was Linda. She had been living on the streets for months, her once bright eyes now dull with exhaustion. Life had been cruel. A veteran who had served her country with pride, now reduced to sleeping on a sidewalk, hoping for spare change. Most people ignored her. Some glanced, then quickly looked away. Others muttered under their breath, assuming she was just another statistic, another person who had made bad choices. But Linda's story was different, and on this day, someone finally noticed. Pam Bondi was walking down the street, dressed sharply, her heels clicking against the pavement. She had places to be, important meetings, a schedule packed with responsibilities. But when she saw Linda, she stopped. She didn't just slow down. She didn't just glance. She stopped. Then, without hesitation, she knelt beside the woman, right there on the pavement. People around them started watching. Some even took out their phones. What was Pam Bondi, a high-profile attorney, a former attorney general, doing kneeling on the street, next to a homeless woman? And then, she spoke. What she said would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Linda hesitated before speaking. Most people who approached her either offered pity or asked her to move along. But there was something different about this woman. Her eyes weren't filled with judgment. They held something else, something Linda hadn't seen in a long time. Concern. Pam reached into her bag. Linda expected her to pull out a few dollars, maybe some spare change. Instead, she handed her a business card. "Call me," Pam said. "I mean it. Call me." Linda looked down at the card. The name Pam Bondi meant nothing to her. All she saw was a phone number. But what caught her attention was the way Pam said it. Not like a polite gesture, not like an empty promise, like a command. Pam didn't wait for a thank you. She just gave Linda one last look and walked away. Linda held the card tightly. She had been ignored for so long that this small act of kindness felt overwhelming. But she had no phone, no way to call, and even if she did, why would this woman help her? She stuffed the card in her pocket, thinking she'd never use it. But the next day, something strange happened. A black SUV pulled up to the sidewalk where she sat. A man in a suit stepped out, scanning the area before locking eyes with her. "Are you Linda?" he asked. Her heart pounded. She hadn't told anyone her name. Before she could answer, he said something that made her sit up straight. "Pam Bondi sent me." Linda's mind raced. Why would Pam Bondi send someone for her? Was this a mistake? A setup? The man in the suit reached into his coat pocket. Linda tensed, her instincts from the military kicking in. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a cell phone and held it toward her. "Pam wants to talk to you." Linda swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled as she took the phone and pressed it to her ear. A familiar voice came through. "Linda, it's me, Pam. I told you to call." Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't have a phone." There was a pause. Then Pam spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "Well, now you do." Linda looked down at the phone in her hand, confused. "Where are you?" Pam asked. Linda hesitated, glancing around at the cold pavement where she had spent the night. "Same place as yesterday." "Not anymore," Pam said. "Get in the car." Linda's stomach tightened. She had spent years learning not to trust people, especially when something seemed too good to be true. But something in Pam's voice made her believe. For the first time in a long time, she had a feeling. Hope. The man in the suit opened the SUV door. Linda hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. As the car pulled away, she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. And in less than 24 hours, she would learn the real reason Pam Bondi had stopped for her. A secret no one saw coming. Linda stared out the window as the city blurred past. The SUV smelled of leather and something expensive, clean, polished, like a life she barely remembered. The man driving hadn't said a word. She stole a glance at him in the rearview mirror. He looked professional, calm, like someone who had done this before. She gripped the phone Pam had given her. The weight of it felt strange in her hands. She hadn't owned a phone in years. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. The driver's eyes flickered to her in the mirror. "You'll see." Linda clenched her jaw. She didn't like feeling out of control. The military had trained her to be prepared for anything, but nothing in her training had covered why a powerful woman like Pam Bondi would take an interest in a homeless veteran. She looked down at herself, her worn-out jacket, the dirt under her nails. It had been a long time since she had seen herself in a mirror. Would she even recognize the person she used to be? The car finally pulled up in front of a tall glass building. It looked like a law office, the kind of place she had only ever seen from the outside. Before she could ask any more questions, the driver stepped out and opened her door. Linda hesitated. She had spent years being invisible. Now it felt like all eyes were on her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and into a world she never thought she'd be part of again. And what waited for her inside would shake her to her core. The receptionist barely looked up as Linda stepped inside, but the moment she gave her name, everything changed. The woman's eyes widened slightly before she quickly picked up the phone. "She's here." Linda shifted on her feet, uneasy. Why did that sound rehearsed, like they had been expecting her? A door opened down the hall, and then Pam Bondi appeared. She wasn't dressed like she had been the day before. No heels, no blazer. This time she wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back. She looked different, less like a public figure, more like a real person. She smiled. "Come on in, Linda." Linda followed her into a large office. The walls were lined with framed certificates, awards and photos. Some were of Pam with important people, presidents, governors, celebrities. Others were different. Photos of soldiers. Linda's chest tightened. Pam gestured toward a chair. "Sit." Linda sat, her heart pounding. Pam leaned forward. "Do you remember Sergeant David Monroe?" The name hit Linda like a punch. David Monroe had been her commanding officer in Afghanistan, a man she had trusted with her life, a man who had saved her when things went bad, a man who had died years ago. Her throat went dry. "Of course I remember him." Pam nodded slowly. "He remembered you too." Linda's hands curled into fists. "What do you mean?" Pam pulled open a desk drawer and placed something in front of Linda. A letter, handwritten, old, worn at the edges. Linda's fingers trembled as she picked it up. Her heart pounded in her ears as she read the first few words. "If anything ever happens to me, find Linda." Her breath caught. David had written this to Pam Bondi years ago. Linda looked up, eyes burning. "Why did he write this to you?" Pam exhaled slowly. "Because David was my cousin." Linda's world spun. The pieces were falling together too fast. Pam hadn't just stopped for a random homeless woman that day. She had been looking for her. For years. Linda's grip tightened around the letter. The ink was slightly faded, but the words stared back at her like a ghost from the past. "If anything ever happens to me, find Linda." Her throat burned. She hadn't thought about David Monroe in years. It hurt too much. He had been more than just a commanding officer. He had been a friend, a brother, the kind of person who made you feel like everything would be okay, even in the middle of a war zone. And now, she was learning that he had been trying to protect her even after death. She looked up at Pam, her voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why would he tell you to find me?" Pam folded her hands together, choosing her next words carefully. "Because David knew something was wrong. He told me that if he didn't make it back, you might not either. That whatever happened over there, it would follow you home." Linda felt her chest tighten. Memories she had buried deep started clawing their way back. David had tried to warn her. Before his last mission, he had said things that didn't make sense at the time. That some soldiers came back and never really came home. That the fight didn't always end when the war did. But she had brushed it off. She told herself she was fine, until she wasn't, until the nightmares got worse, until she lost her job, her apartment, and somewhere along the way, herself. Tears blurred her vision as she looked back down at the letter. I let him down, she choked out. I let myself down. Pam's voice was firm. No, you didn't. You survived. And now, we fix this. Linda shook her head. How? I have nothing left. Pam reached across the desk and placed her hand over Linda's. You have me. Linda looked up, searching Pam's face for any sign of pity. But there was none. Only determination. David wanted me to find you, Pam said. And I did. But this isn't where the story ends, Linda. It's where it begins. Linda wiped her eyes. For the first time in years, she believed that might be true. Linda took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had spent so long believing that her story was already over, that there was no way back. But now she wasn't so sure. Pam stood up and grabbed a folder from a nearby shelf. She placed it in front of Linda and opened it. Inside were documents, forms, and an address. What is this? Linda asked, her fingers hovering over the papers. Pam leaned forward. This is a fresh start. Linda's eyes darted across the pages. A place to stay, a rehabilitation program, a job opportunity. Pam had been planning this long before she ever stopped on that sidewalk. Linda's throat tightened. Why are you doing this for me? Pam's voice was steady. Because my cousin died believing in you, and because I believe in you too. Linda's hands trembled. This was more than just a second chance. It was hope, real hope. But something still gnawed at her. What if I fail? She whispered. Pam smiled. Then we try again. Linda let out a shaky breath. No one had ever said that to her before. She looked down at the papers one last time. Then slowly, she picked up the pen. And in that moment, for the first time in years, she chose to fight for herself. As she signed her name, she didn't just see ink on a page. She saw a future. One she never thought she'd have. One she was finally ready to live. Linda's story isn't just about one woman finding her way back. It's about all the veterans who struggle in silence. The ones who gave everything and came home to nothing. If you or someone you know is a veteran in need, help is out there. Don't wait for someone to find you. Reach out. Because like Linda, you deserve a second chance. And sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to walk past.